Hi. Hi, Pete. Hi, Max. How are you?
Hello.
How's everyone? Hey, audience. Thank you for
Oh,
joining
hi.
us today. Yeah, there's a lot of people in here. Thank you for joining us today. I hope your Thanksgiving weekend was fun, but we're here today to learn better ways to ramp your SDRs and AEs
Mm.
with the only one and only Pete Kazanjy and his friend Max Kling. But first, let's give folks a little bit of time for them to join us. Audience, why don't you open the chat and tell us where you're calling from? We love to hear from you. And while the audience is telling us where they're calling from, I'm going to ask Pete and Max, what is your favorite holiday? Let me start with Max.
My
M-
favorite holiday. Um, Probably, I don't know, it's a toss-up between like Thanksgiving and Christmas because both are like big
Yeah.
eating holidays, and I'm a big fan of that. So probably Thanksgiving. I think that's probably what I'll go
Yeah, I
Well,
think
I
I
would
would.
say Christmas because you eat and then you get gifts.
with.
There you
True.
go. Yeah, I, w- I think I would have. I would echo Max there, but ever since I had a kid, I have a 5-year-old Mikey, and I think that like Halloween is probably like our favorite now because it involves costumes. So I think that's a good one. Eduardo, what's your favorite?
Well, I used to like Christmas because I am from Brazil and Christmas is in summer in Brazil. I hate winter. Um, so it was like in the middle of your summer vacation. It was hot. You would go to the beach right after, and now it's just cold and snowy. I did, yeah, not Christmas
And
anymore.
now you live in New York.
Now I live
Yikes.
in New York. So I would say Halloween because it's not that cold. So I would say Halloween.
There you go.
Halloween is fun.
All
Yeah.
right.
All right, we have people from everywhere. San Francisco, oh, that's UP. We have people from New
Mhm.
Jersey, Asbury Park, Charlotte, North Carolina. All right.
Oh,
So
neat.
let's start. Let me share my slides right here. Let's start. Today we are here for this masterclass with P to the Moon, how to ramp your SDRs and AEs faster with the one and only P Kazanjy and Max Klang. And we are so excited about the amazing content and takeaways that you audience will get from this event. And today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with MSP, you are missing out, but you will be invited to join right after because our goal is to make your life way easier. We are the biggest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer the toughest revenue questions out there and to help them see around corners they might not know about. And we do that through great live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum, and we also have quarterly summits. And we are starting to get back to in-person events, which is pretty exciting. We had
Mhm.
a Dreamforce happy hour last September. It was really fun. And then, as I said, if you're not part of the MSP team yet, you will be invited to join right after this event. And as I said, we have quarterly summits, and we just launched our January summit. If you like this content today that Pete will share, you will love our 3-day mega school happening January 24 through the 26th next year. We are organizing stellar content and out of this world speakers. I am going to put a link in the chat for you to join us to register for this amazing event. All
It's
right,
gonna be
but
fun.
now let's focus. Yeah, it will be a lot of fun. The speakers are already like amazing. Let's focus on this session now. I have some housekeeping notes before I pass it up to P. Um, this event is being recorded, so you will be able to access the recording afterwards in the MSP previous event page in our website. And also, I will send a follow-up email for everyone with the link, so you can have this information handy when you need it. And also, let's use the chat and the Q&A function. Pete loves answering questions, so
Mhm.
put all your questions in there. It's not always that you have the chance to ask your questions to Pete, so let's use it. They love questions, and we will make sure to get to all of your questions at the end of this event. And that's it from me. Now, this event is sponsored by the amazing Atrium, and Pete is here to tell us a little bit about Atrium. Pete, I'm gonna pass the mic to you so you can tell us the amazing stuff that Atrium is doing, and then introduce yourself, introduce us to Max, and then you can kick things off.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eduardo. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for
I'll see you later.
the Megasco design looks out of this world. Heyo.
Thank you.
Hey folks, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. For folks who are not familiar, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales teams, so sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to measure and improve the performance of their teams. And one of the things that's particularly rad about Atrium is it just takes 5 minutes to set up. It's super easy to create a preview account. You just log in with your Salesforce credentials, and within 5 minutes, Atrium will show you how all your reps are performing across hundreds of metrics. Yay, sales math. I think Max, you have your sales nerd hat on. Nice. Oh
right
man,
here.
I should have. Oh shoot, I should have brought mine. Cool. So let's do a little introductions here. My name is Pete Kazanjy. Like I said, I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Prior to Atrium, I started and sold a recruiting software company called TalentBin. Started in 2010, sold it around 2014 to Monster Worldwide, and and like my experience at TalentBin was kind of where I went from being a business generalist founder to being our first sales rep, sales manager, sales leader. After TalentBin was acquired by Monster, I hung out there for a bit, led new product sales for a 600-person sales organization at Monster, which was a little bit of a change for me, and then ended up wrote a book on sales for startup sales called Founding Sales, and then started Modern Sales Pros. So that's kind of how I came to this current state. And I'm super pumped to have one of our account executives here today, Max Kling. Max, you want to go ahead and let people know kind of what you spend your time doing here at Atrium, and maybe some of the organizations that you've sold at previously, just so folks can understand the breadth of your sales motion expertise, if you will.
Yes, of course. Like
Wonderful.
Pete said, I'm Max Klang. I'm an account executive over here at Atrium. I've been here like almost 2 years now, which is kind of
Woo-hoo.
crazy to say out loud. And had a couple runs at other sales organizations before this. The first was Bright Edge, and then Asana, and then I ended up here at Atrium. And I'm super pumped to talk about ramping with the whole squad.
Yeah. Max is. I mean, we have a lot of sales nerds here at Atrium. Max is definitely, one of the king sales nerds here at Atrium. So that's what we focus on. So before we get started, we have an offer for folks here today. If folks are interested in getting a copy of each of these books, these are really fantastic sales management books. 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach is probably my favorite one here because it's written as a novel. It's like pretty fun. Crushing Quota by Michelle Vazana is another, is like a little bit more of like a technical kind of like textbooky book on sales management, specifically how to be a good first line manager. And then of course the Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon is like a pretty fun read in general, because you get to like hear all the crazy stuff that John did as being a CRO of like 5 different public companies. And then of course, if you we'll also include a Coffees for Closers Yeti mug. So we're going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat for folks to grab those if you're interested. And all we ask in exchange is for a quick discovery chat with one of our account executives, all of whom are delightful human beings, as evidenced by Max here. Wonderful. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about ramp today, and specifically how to measure and improve the ramp of SDRs and NAEs, which is something that's like really top of mind for folks these days. Kind of in a choppy economic environment, I think a lot of folks are want to make sure that their reps are coming into band quickly, and that if somebody's having hiccups here or there, that we're able to address that, or if somebody's not going to be able to make it, that we offboard them in a timely fashion, such that we don't waste their opportunities on don't waste other people's opportunities on them, and don't have somebody who's burning a bunch of salary expense that otherwise could be going to another rep. So these are the big topics we're going to cover. Bad ramp versus good ramp. Why does ramping fail? New rep ramp productivity offset. This is something that's we've kind of coined that I think it will be interesting to folks. And then how to do good data-driven ramping here. And so what we're not going to be talking about today is onboarding content or training. More what we're going to be focused on here is how you can use data to monitor and manage and improve the ramps of your SDRs and your AEs. So I think one of the things that kind of puzzles people, if you will, is like, why is ramp measurement so hard? And really what it kind of comes down to is that a successful ramp for an account executive or an SDR has a bunch of time offset periods, right? And so if you look at this is kind of a visualization that we've put together to kind of help document this, or help kind of like reveal this. So down here we've got kind of our area of full productivity, where essentially an AE is fully ramped, they're on their merry way. But the problem is that this is offset from this is offset quite a bit of time from when they're initially onboarded. And so this is kind of like where the big challenge ends up showing up is, when you first hire, you've got some training time. Then people start taking opportunities because they've done the training, they're not going to fall on their face for those first meetings. Then you start doing pipe build, right? Which is, you're starting to take those first meetings, you're starting to keep those opportunities in your pipe. You're probably falling on your face a little bit here, right? So some of the opportunities are falling out of the pipe. Then maybe you close your first deal. We call that the period of partial productivity right here. So it's like, hey, we're now partially productive, right? We're closing a deal, we're closing a couple deals, but we're not quite at that full productivity point yet. And so the problem is that these periods have this time offset here, and if you're not paying attention to leading indicators throughout here, you're kind of blind. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the negative implications associated with doing like not paying attention to those leading indicators in ramp. Max, you've worked with a lot of sales organizations through through your work at Atrium, and you've been onboarded a couple times to different organizations. What do you think are some of the biggest like gotchas in this process right here?
I don't know. I think a lot of times, like what I see pretty frequently is like a leader or sales manager getting like head faked by a rep that has like early success.
Sure.
Maybe they close a deal really quickly, and then next thing they know, it's like 5 months later, they're just like persisting in this like partial productivity phase and never quite actually getting into like a fully ramped quota. A lot of times I feel like that happens more often than people realize, though, as they get head faked by someone having initial success and then being a failure to launch.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right, and I think I think we'll talk about that a little bit here in this section, as to like why that's problematic. As a sales leader myself, I think probably, if I'm being intellectually honest, I think the reason why organizations have a tendency to do that is because as soon as somebody like kind of closes the first deal, you're like, all right, great. Like it's almost like manager happy ears.
I was just about to say, it's the sales manager equivalent of happy ears.
It totally is. Like, oh man, I don't have to worry about this guy. I mean, because like onboarding reps is like, it's a lot of calories, right? So if all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I don't have to worry about you, great, right? But it's like, it's kind of it's a head fake. It's a little bit of like a siren song there. Awesome. Okay, well we'll talk about how you can avoid kind of getting head fake by that. Probably the bigger problem that we end up seeing, or maybe not the bigger problem, but it's like the more basic problem that we end up seeing is organizations that kind of like wait to declare victory at the point of full productivity. Like essentially they do what we call full productivity certification, where you say, hey, you know what? We're not going to pass judgment on reps, right? We're not going to pass judgment. We're not going to declare victory or failure until they're at this full productivity period. And so the problem with this is that depending on the sales cycle of your organization, that can actually be a pretty hefty offset, right? So let's say you're a prototypical mid-market sales organization. Let's say you have a 60 or 70-day sales cycle. Like a pretty reasonable rule of thumb for somebody to get to like full productivity is going to be like 2 or 3 deal cycles. And so like, let's say you've got a month of training, and then you've got a deal cycle, which is 60 days. Well, that's another 2 months. And then you got another deal cycle, which is another 2 months. That's like 5 months of offset, right? So let's say like 5 months is like the earliest you could potentially declare victory there. And maybe it's even as late as 7 months. Well, so if what you're doing there is you're saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to hold my breath and I'm not going to like declare, I'm not going to make past judgment until we get to like, month 5 or month 7. Well, like a lot of bad things can kind of happen in the meantime, right? And so to kind of like give some examples here, this is not Max. This is not Max Kling. This is Max Power, right? Which I guess is I don't know. Is that like a Deadpool joke, perhaps? So what you can kind of see here is an example of a rep who, this is a ramping view here where this is time equals first month, second month, third month, fourth month. And what you can kind of see here is this is comparing like to like. This is actually one of the features Atrium has that's pretty differentiated that allows you to kind of put these folks at kind of apples to apples. And so what you can kind of see is like Max Power is kind of like bumping along here. And so if you're an organization where you're like, hey man, like I'm going to wait until month 5, I'm going to wait until month 6 or month 7 in order to declare victory or pass judgment. Well, you can imagine yourself in this month 6 situation or month 7 situation, kind of being like, all right, well, he looks like he's getting there. He looks like he's getting there. He looks like he's getting there. But this is kind of an example of why it's so important to pay attention to leading indicators in these scenarios, because if you look at like opportunity ownership by Max Power here, you can see that he's coming into band with respect to his opportunity ownership as compared to his peers. So that's good. But if you were to look at something like pure selling activity, like in this case, customer facing meeting volume right here, well, if you looked at this, you'd start being very concerned in month 2, month 3, and month 4. Right, like this is something where like it would make this should make the hair on the back of your neck stick up. And so this is why waiting to that point of full productivity before you're passing judgment is really, really, really problematic, because in month 5 or month 7 here, you might say, hey, he's almost there, he's almost there, he's almost there. If you're only looking at opportunity ownership, you might say like, okay, he's almost there, and he's got a bunch of ops that are in pipe, like it's probably okay, like I'm feeling a little bit more confident about it. But if you were looking at something like this, man, in month 2 or month 3, alarm bells would be going off. And so this is an example of why full productivity certification can be so pernicious, is because like by not paying attention to those leading indicators, you're potentially being pretty seriously head fake there. Max, any kind of like, I imagine you've probably seen this in some of your customers' sales motions and what have you. Any sort of things that pop to mind around like, why this is particularly problematic and how to avoid this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, like the big thing here is that like Max could have still been saved in like month 3, like with a little bit of
Sure.
managing, right? Like, hey,
Yep.
we need you to have more meetings with your pipeline, right? And then you can set goals on that stuff and kind of get ahead of it. And so like, yeah, like we don't want to pass judgment until we like have a better understanding. But like in this case, like this was very savable, right? And so like, I don't know,
Yeah.
this is a big miss.
Yeah, yeah, it's a manager miss.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's a great way of kind of thinking about this. Is one of the things that we talk about here at Atrium is that you don't use, I mean, I even said it in the elevator pitch earlier, Atrium is about using data, right? Using metrics to improve performance. It's not like, to pass judgment like a judge or what have you. It's like it's measuring it and then improving. And like that's a really great point in this situation right here. Like, oh, cool, let's get ahead of this and like, get this guy juiced up so he's actually having a sufficient number of meetings with his ops, because like he's got plenty of ops in his pipe. That's a great point, Max. So let's go ahead and talk about first deal based certification here. This is Max was kind of noting this a little bit earlier. At least it's better, right? Like at least you're not waiting around until all the way here. Now, the problem, of course, in this sort of situation is the risk of the false positive, right? The false positive. And I think Max, you know, kind of brought up a good point earlier around why you could imagine calling this like wanting to have those happy ears. We're like, oh man, that's great. Here's a rep I don't have to worry about anymore. And so you can kind of see a situation here where if you're looking at the wins here, like this rep Jane Snow comes fast out of the gate in her third month. She's closing two deals here. Problem is that if you had, you know, erroneously declared victory there, like this is what comes to pass in month 5, month 6, month 7. And so this again is why it's so important to make sure that you're paying attention to those leading indicators, because in this case, Jane here, like you can kind of see that there's a pretty substantial delta here with respect to customer facing meeting volume here over time, especially after that initial kind of like fast out of the gate situation there. It's not nearly as pronounced as max power there, but it's like not nothing. And I think that's like, so this would be another example where if you're tempted to say woohoo, like declare victory, we're on our merry way, you could literally see like, hey, you would have caught this in month 3 and month 4 and said, hey, you know what, we got to chop here, let's fix this, rather than, because like there probably was something good going on here and we just needed to make sure that they were repeating the good versus kind of taking our foot off the gas. And you can kind of see something similar here. This is another KPI, kind of a differentiate KPI that our customers at Atrium really enjoy using, which is tracking the number of stages that like deal stages that have been reached. Like it's a really great leading indicator of like essentially just like pipeline momentum. And so what you can see here is that Jane has a lot of stage advancements here in that first period, and then that really starts trailing off. And so this is a great example of why being head faked like that is really dangerous. And so why even if someone comes hot out of the gate and closes a couple deals, you still got to make sure that you're paying attention to those leading indicators on an ongoing basis, because that's where you're going to be able to catch potential problems that will only then show up in month 5, month 6, etc. from a booking standpoint. Max, have you seen this in some of your customers before, this kind of like fast out of the gate head fake?
Yeah, and this one's honestly a lot more scary than the last situation, Pete, because if you were the manager and you didn't have any like easy way to track meetings, like in like the way you're like most people who don't have an easy way to track meetings are doing this is they're just pulling up their rep's calendar and then eyeballing it. Like you would look like they're having the same number of meetings month over month, because you'd only be looking at this like on a weekly basis. And so like you wouldn't really see a huge delta, and then it would go too long before you actually like intervene or catch something. So
right, that's a great point, because you probably wouldn't be like, you wouldn't be like comparing it to the other people, right? Like you would only be comparing them to themselves. And you're like, man, they're having the same, they're as active as they were when they closed 2 deals or whatever. Like, what's the deal? Versus saying, hey, actually, this person is way off as compared to their peers. Like we gotta get ahead of that bad boy. So what we advocate that organizations do is use data and metrics to pay attention to these leading indicators during this pipe build period, right? So it's like, hey, is everybody on the right glide path here? Do the leading indicators look solid? Right? Are the intermediary indicators look solid as well? So like there's like the leading indicators, there's intermediary, and then if like the leading indicators plus like the middle indicators are like tracking in the right direction, like we could probably bet pretty well that the lagging indicators are going to get there eventually. At least have, it's not a foregone conclusion, but at least like we feel like we're tracking in the right direction. And so that's why making sure that you're paying attention to those leading indicators in this period right here ends up being super important. And so kind of to give an example what that would look like here, if we look at these reps right here, you can see that everybody's kind of coming into band appropriately here. Like maybe this rep was a little bit light here with Norma Jean, kind of had like a little bit of a hiccup there, but then through managerial intervention, what have you, was able to get back on the right track. And like, that's a pretty common thing is, reps are just human, right? And so like things come up. And so as a manager, you're responsible for kind of like measuring and helping them in the right direction. So in this case, like saying, hey, you know what, like you stopped ramping the way that everybody else did in month 4. Let's get ahead of that, right? Or this rep right here was off in month 5, but just double checking that and saying, hey, like, let's get ahead of this to make sure that we don't end up in a bad situation in a couple months. You can see the same thing happening with opportunity ownership. The same is true here with like stage advancements as well. Like, and this is one of the things. It's funny. We can kind of see this with organizations that we end up working with. Is one, really well managed organizations will oftentimes have very consistent ramping. um, and so like you look at the cohorts of their reps and like everybody kind of ramps the same way. I wish I could name names, but I can't. But like now that we have nearly 300 customers, it's pretty rad to see an organization that's really firing in all cylinders, and you see their reps ramping. And like everybody, even like the folks that are in month 3, they're like exactly where month 3 was for like the 40 other reps that came before them. And so like that's the thing that you would like to aspire to do, is just have folks, like have everybody ramping consistently like this. And then moreover, if you have a hiccup, like you can intervene and then get that person into the state that they need to be. And then of course, you have enough customer facing meetings, the opportunity build is doing what it needs to be doing. Stage advancements is doing what it needs to be doing. Well, guess what, like bookings are gonna follow. Knock on wood, but at least you have the best chance of success there. um, Max, of the customers that you work with, when you kind of have seen them effectively paying attention to those leading indicators in ramp, what are the kind of the things that helps their organization get better at?
I think like once you have better context around what those different like milestones are and expectations for specific leading indicators, like relaying that to your reps on like an expectation basis of like, hey, at this point in your ramp, you should be having 10 to 15 customer facing meetings a week, and touching these many opportunities per week. Like being able to relay that stuff and like almost like laying out a blueprint for your new ramper
Sure.
is like a really powerful thing in terms of like removing like any ambiguity to them and making them feel like there is a recipe for success in the role. I think it just helps holistically with like buy it on the rep side, and then it also helps managers just like know what to look out for and like when it needs to be an issue or not an issue.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's kind of like the other masterclass that we do around setting and managing with goals, or what is the name? Goals that don't suck is the spicy name of that masterclass. But yeah, like doing that in ramp, where it's like, hey, yeah, in month 2 we're gonna give you 10 opportunities. You should probably like use Atrium as an example. One of the things that we really focus on here is because it's so quick to turn on an Atrium account, it takes like 5 minutes. Our AEs are really focused on turning on accounts with customers or with prospects that they're having discovery meetings with. It's like, hey, we're going to give you 10 opportunities. You're probably going to have 10 first meetings in your second month. And of that, we want to see 5 of those folks turn on accounts and then progress to the preview portion of the sales process. If you're doing that, you are healthy, things are going to be good, right? That sort of thing. I love it. Thank you. Cool. So one of the things I want to talk about really quickly is like, okay, well, like how do I do this better? And I think the important thing there is like, one, just have conviction around paying attention to those leading indicators. Now, then you might say, okay, cool, I believe you, Pete. That is something that I ought to do. How do I go around doing that? Well, software can really make this a lot easier. Atrium is one way you can do this. There's other ways you can do it as well. Atrium's a pretty great way to do this because it's focused very much on this is like a key use case is instrumenting the success and health of ramps. These are the things that most sales managers ought to be spending their time doing. It's not just deal inspection, but it's like bringing data and metrics into one-on-ones, tracking progress towards goals, as Max was noting earlier. But a really, really critical behavior that managers should be doing is monitoring that new hire ramp. And so what our claim is to the market is that, hey, like, this is sales management is such a important thing that that it deserves its own software to help do data-driven sales management. And so what Atrium has every KPI your team could need, for measuring AEs, SDRs, AMCSMs, and then importantly, it monitors all that, right? It monitors progress towards goals. It tells you early warning alerting, and then moreover, it does root cause analysis and performance diagnosis. It also automatically tracks progress of on ramps as well. And in short, essentially what Atrium does is it helps sales managers use data to improve performance, especially in ramp. And so we work with hundreds of customers in order to do just that. Really fantastic. They gain really fantastic benefits that come out of that. Like, so Gainsight's a great example of a customer that resurrected more than $3 million in stock opportunities that were kind of missing, based on improved pipeline hygiene. Envoy is another fantastic customer of ours. They increased their meeting volumes by 1.5x and improved their pipe hygiene by more than 40%. And WorkRamp did the same thing. And so the point is that, like, we think that using data to measure and improve performance is like astronomically important for managers, and so they deserve kind of their own software to do that. Cool. So enough about us. Let's get back to kind of like the topic at hand. So then we might say, okay, cool, get it, Pete. I want to measure these leading indicators. I want to make sure that we're on top of things. What should I be doing there, right? And so the way to kind of think about this is, like, this is a set of various metrics here. This is SDR land. This is AE land right here. Probably the most important thing to do is to make sure that you're paying attention to these inputs, like these key ramping indicators. For account executives, those would be things like opportunity ownership. You kind of saw it up above with some examples, like opportunity ownership. Like, do we have ops that are coming into the pipe? Are those ops large, right? Like, paying attention to pipe ownership in addition to just pure op ownership is probably pretty powerful. Are new opportunities coming into pipe? This can be something that can be really problematic if you don't pay attention to this. Like, maybe in month 2 or month 3, you get a good pipe build, but then new opportunities stop coming into pipe. That can be really dangerous, because 60 days from there, 75 days from there, you're going to have a bookings outage there. And then of course, just raw like effort things like customer facing meeting volume ends up like being really powerful leading indicators. So like these are really great leading indicators with respect to AEs. On the SDR side, it's more kind of just like pure activity based stuff. So like, are we doing a good job with respect to our email and call volume? Are we contacting a lot of unique humans, like contacts? Are we engaging with enough unique accounts? And then kind of a similar concept to this new opportunity ownership down here is new account new account engagement and new contact engagement here. And of course, if you have enough, if like you have a high quantity of high quality execution against these right here, then the outputs will come. Max, any fan favorites in here for you and your customers?
Yeah, I think like one of the ones that always surprises me is like the fact that a lot of organizations just like aren't tracking meetings in like a meaningful way. Like if you ask any sales leader, like they'll tell you like next steps and getting like meetings on the calendar as an AE is like one of the most important things. But like at the end of the day, like I still hear this all the time that folks aren't tracking meeting volume and like KPIing on meeting volume for their AEs. And like it's always a huge surprise to me in my like conversations with people. So that's definitely my favorite.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I mean, we have a bunch of silly phrases here at Atrium, but like I think one of the ones is that like the customer facing meeting is like, it's like the unit of selling, right? Like selling happens in a customer facing meeting. So if you only could measure one thing, right? Like you would measure that, because it would tell you like, is high quality customer facing like selling behavior happening? And then of course you can end up cutting it a bunch of different ways. Like Well, if you're only paying attention to meetings, then like, well, you can look at first meetings, and then you can look at
Hmm.
total meetings, and like, are we high level of effort? Then you can look at conversion rate from first meeting to second meeting, blah blah blah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is shocking how many organizations are like light when it comes to instrumenting that. Cool. So then these are a couple of different ways of doing this, systematizing this. One, you can use CRM reporting, which comes with your CRM. Challenge with that is that it ends up, you gotta make it, right? Like the nice thing about it is it's available and flexible, but like unfortunately you gotta make the stuff. Same is kind of true with like BI. It's even heavier thing to implement. Our favorite here at Atrium, of course, is data-driven sales management software, which of course is like super quick to set up. It can be a little less flexible just because all the KPIs are pre-baked. But the important thing is it's like set up specifically for instrumenting the like health of ramps, and also automatically monitors all these things. The places where you would want to make sure that ramp observation is happening is internal meetings. So this is one of the things that we talk about here at Atrium, is we say that calendar is destiny. Oh, it's like literally here on the slide. Wonderful. So if you're making sure that you're having these management, like these features of your sales management motion are happening on a recurring basis, this is the place where you will be observing those metrics in order to say, uh-oh, this person's light, or yay, this person's outperforming. And these are some examples of that. Like, so a pipeline review, most sales managers don't need any reminding on doing pipeline review or deal strategy. But a really impactful place for that metrics review to happen is the one-on-one meeting, right? So making sure that that those reps, that like the manager and reps are paying attention to those things, or like paying attention to those metrics in the one-on-one. The one-on-one is different than a deal strategy meeting. It's different than a pipeline review, etc. And then of course this can be done on a more like lagged basis, or a larger time offset basis in QBRs as well. Max, any kind of comments on the features of the sales management motion here?
Not really. I think one thing I always kind of laugh at, though, is a lot of times, you kind of alluded to this, is like sometimes the one-on-one can turn into like a deal strategy or a pipe review for a
Yeah.
lot of organizations. And having a clear distinction is obviously like super important. It's really important in ramp, though. Super
Yeah.
important to be talking about the ramping metrics we care about.
That's a great point, because like we probably don't have a lot of deals that are in pipe, right? We're trying to get
Mhm.
deals that are in pipe. Like, are you prospecting? Are there like, are you are you supposed to be prospecting right now? Right. So
Mhm.
then your email and your account volume should be a lot higher. Are new opportunities coming in the pipe? Right. Because if we spend our time talking about the 5 deals that you have, well, then maybe we miss the fact that you're not doing the things needed in order to get more deals into the pipe. That's a great point. Wonderful. So now let's talk a little bit about how to systematize kind of like the perception, or like the interpretation of what's happening in ramp. And so it's like one thing to have this on the calendar. It's the next thing is like to make sure that we're actually consuming the information and reasoning against it. And so the way that we kind of describe that is, you want to make sure that you're detecting, diagnosing root causes, like detecting issues, diagnosing potential root causes, and then communicating to fix this. And this is what Max was talking about earlier in the meeting, where like this is your job as a manager. Your job as a manager is not to be a super rep. Your job as a manager is not to be a cheerleader. It's part of it is to be a cheerleader, but your job as a manager is to be a coach, and like detect issues, figure out like what's up, right, and then fix it. Like that is the act of management, not to kind of say like, hey, I'm here to support you, go ahead and figure it out. Like you're supposed to be a hands-on coach, and this is the mechanism by which to do this and to like proactively manage that. And so a good example of this would be like, okay, well, shoot, we got this situation here, here's Max, right, power, and Max power here is like light when it comes to bookings here. All right, like, what's the deal, man? What's the deal? And so the way to think about this, like, and that's like a hard question to potentially answer if you're approaching it in an unstructured fashion. Well, but what you can do is you have to think about the upstream impacts that drive bookings. And so one of the ways that we help with this is we have these fun little revenue formula laminates that we send to folks, and maybe we can drop into the chat the sign up for that. We'd be happy to send you a copy of them. But it's like, okay, where's the bookings problem coming from? Is it because the person doesn't have enough wins? Or is it because his ASP is low? Or is it because his deal cycle is sucky? Or, okay, maybe it's because his wins are problematic. Well, if his wins are problematic, is it because he's not getting enough at bats, right? Not enough attempts? Or is it because his win rate is not good? And so by kind of like going right, if you will, here, that's going to help you understand like what the issue is here. So in this case, we look at Max and be like, oh, okay, like what's going on here? Let's go ahead and look at those different things. Like, does he have enough ops that are in his pipe? Right? That's how we would look at attempts. Does he have enough wins? What is his win rate as compared to others during this first 5-month or 6-month period? Those would help us isolate what his potential issue is there. And in the case of Max Power here, like we saw before, it's literally just like not enough, when it comes to his attempts, he's like not working them sufficiently, right? I think if I recall correctly, if we go back up here to Mr. Max Power, yeah, we can see that he's got a bunch of opportunities that are in his pipe, right? So if we looked at that, we'd say, hey, look, you know what? We've got a bunch of, he's getting enough attempts. He's just not working them right, right? Like this is the problem all the way over here at the right. And so that's, that's the way that we would diagnose what that potential issue is. And then importantly, intervene. And I think Max Kling noted this earlier, is if we had caught this, if we're here, right, and we had caught this, like in month 3 or month 4, we'd say like, man, why are we light with respect to bookings? And we went right and we looked at the other kind of like leading indicators, we would have quickly aligned on this. Now, as Max pointed out earlier, probably even better if we had just been tracking progress on goals for this ahead of time, because we would have caught this like, hey man, this guy's way out of band with respect to ramp. But both of those approaches catch that leading indicator, like allow us to detect the issue, diagnose what the root causes, and then we coach the rep up and say, hey, we got to get this higher. You don't have a problem with opportunity ownership. You got plenty of ops. We just need you working them and making sure that we're getting next meetings on the calendar. In fact, what I want you to do is I want you to CC me on all the communications to all of your ops, today and tomorrow, getting meetings on the calendar with all the opportunities that don't yet have meetings. Like that would be a coaching action that would come from like coming out of this detect and diagnosis approach here. Max, any kind of comments that you might make on how managers can be more effective at doing this? Because this is like really where the rubber hits the road, and where like legacy kind of like what we call analytics, like the A word, really falls down. Like people aren't necessarily like looking at this stuff and not diagnosing. How do you see people do a better job, managers do a better job of it so they can fix things?
Yeah, I think like the ones that do it really well are like not oversimplifying it, but they're keeping it really simple in terms of like
Sure.
the main drivers that they're going to really like index on. Like obviously like meetings is a big part of that. And then like off ownership, pipe ownership, stuff like that. And then the ones that are really just like, kind of like hitting the ground running have like really good like mechanisms or like things in place that will help them stay up to date on when a rep is having an issue, right? So like any type of like alerting or ways to be proactive on like when bad things are happening, like we need to be on top of this stuff. So we're just like not being super reactive. So anytime you can get stuff like that, like that's a like huge deal.
Right. Like bringing stuff to you. And this is, one of the reasons why one of the things that Atrium really shines is in ramp, is because monitoring progress toward like monitoring in like, hey, look, this rep right here has touched 60% fewer accounts than the typical ramping employee. That's something that would be very concerning to a manager. like this sort of moment right here. And this is like in large organizations, this is where kind of like junior sales operations analysts can sometimes come into play. Like if you're a LinkedIn or a HubSpot or a Box or whatever, you might have a bunch of 24-year-old or 25-year-old like finance grads or whatever kind of doing this bird dogging for you. Most organizations unfortunately don't have the budgetary prowess to be able to afford that. Cool. So we're going to do to kind of like wrap up here, we're going to give a little example of what this looks like in practice, a little case study. This is actually an Atrium customer that had a little bit of like a kind of a ramping head fake that they eventually caught. But it was kind of elucidates exactly what's going on here and why it's so important to pay attention to those leading indicators. So this little this Chicken Little character here, not their real name, was ramping, and you can see was like ramping with a set of other folks. What was interesting was his opportunity ownership ramp was like pretty okay, like wasn't terrible. It was better than this rep right here. But if you started looking at some of the activity and kind of other leading indicators there, what was interesting is that even though that opportunity ownership was like okay, the activity was like really off. So a little bit kind of like the Max Power example here, a little bit where it's like, hey man, your like op ownership is looking okay, but like, why are we not touching them? It seems kind of weird. And then moreover, in this particular organization, they AEs do a lot of their own self-prospecting. This is a product-led growth organization where account executives are kind of like prospecting into the free user base. And so presumably what you would anticipate is you would expect those account executives to be engaging with like a lot of unique companies, what Atrium calls accounts here. And you can see that this rep like really wasn't doing that. In fact, he was only pretty much interacting with the only like quote unquote accounts he was touching was those opportunities that were in pipe, which just kind of indicates like you're not actually like feeding your pipe for month 5 and month 6, month 7, right? So if you were only looking at this, you might say like, oh, okay, cool, everything's hunky dory. When you start getting a little bit more granular and looking at leading indicators, then like the hair should start sticking up on the back of your neck here, especially with respect to this prospect behavior. And then of course you can just see this in raw activity. Now, if you want to get really sophisticated here and look at those stage advancements and kind of the key stages that were being hit, you can kind of see that early on, those disco stages, right? So like discovery was kind of the first stage in this organization sales motion. You can kind of see like he kind of comes in the band, he's doing okay here. But then it really like it's okay, it's not amazing, like it's not terrible, but it's not great. But then getting in here at a month 4, a month 5, you can really see like, okay, wait a minute, like nothing's coming. Like this is probably related to this right here of like insufficiently prospecting into those accounts. And you can see that like the number of opportunities that are getting to disco here are just like not where they need to be at all, right? And then moreover, as you kind of get down funnel, you can see the same thing is happening here. So kind of like solution presentation is the next step in their sales motion, and you can see that it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so of course all this kind of comes out in the form of bookings where yeah, this rep is like doing an okay job, and this is like demonstrative of why like only paying attention to those lagging indicators is problematic. Like if we look at this right here, like he's doing okay here, he's doing okay here. This is where he really starts missing as compared to his peers, right? In that month 4 and month 5 period. And so, all in what you can see is in the first kind of quarter, as compared to his peers, he's got 40% fewer wins than his peers, and he's got 40% less bookings than his peers. And so this would be a great example of, man, like in this case, the organization did get ahead of this in month 4. They're like, okay, hey, what's going on here? But probably they could have like gotten a little bit more ahead of it. Especially like looking at something like this, where like there's just like not a behavior that's supposed to be happening. It's just like not happening. And so what kind of like the spoiler alert here is at least in month 4, they did have a conversation with everyone like, hey, what's the deal here? And it turned out that the rep was actually running a side hustle during work hours that kind of got a little bit more, became less of a side hustle and maybe more of a main hustle. During work hours, and you can kind of see that's like where this really kind of showed up here, right? Now, eventually, they ended up offboarding the rep because, like, obviously that's a really huge problem from an organizational standpoint. But it's kind of one of those things where, like, if they had caught it in month 2 or month 3, maybe it wouldn't have gotten so bad, and they might have been able to retain the rep in a like doing the things that he needs to be doing. Fun story, huh, Max? Anything to add here?
Love a good side hustle story.
Oh, jeez Louise. It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. There's another prospect when I was selling, back when I was selling Atrium, before we had, account executives who are more talented sellers than me. But back in, I think it was like 2017 with one of our early like alpha customers. It was kind of crazy. I remember talking to one of the leaders of this organization that made enterprise infrastructure software, and they were like, oh yeah, man, like we like figured out that one of our reps was running, get this, a 12 house Airbnb network concurrently with their day job. And the funny thing was, and you could totally see it in their metrics. It's like this rep is like not having any customer facing meetings. The thing that was like particularly, this is a fairly enterprise heavy organization. The thing that was kind of funny was that this one rep had this like really big account that he was sitting on, that like he knew was going to come in and kind of like cover a pretty large part of his quota. And so in the meantime, you know how there's that behavior of like oftentimes like reps will hit like a really big deal and they'll kind of like check out for like 15 days, sometimes like maybe 30 days after the deal hits. In this case, he had kind of like taken his foot substantially off the gas, even ahead of the deal came in. The deal came in, but it's kind of one of those things where it's just like, hey, you're like, can you believe that this person is like spending all their day, like all their time managing this Airbnb network when they could be working their territory? And at the time, I think the organization only had like 10 reps. So like this guy had like a pretty substantial territory that was like not really being executed on. So fun stuff. Wonderful. Well, that's everything that we have to cover here today. If you're interested in grabbing, like I said, a set of these books right here, so all 3 of these books, they're all really fantastic for their own reasons here. And then also a wonderful Coffee is for Closers mug. We're going to go ahead and drop the hyperlink here, and we're going to go ahead and drop the hyperlink here for folks to go ahead and grab this. And so I think that there's maybe a couple of questions here. Carrie, would you show these reports to reps and how they compare to others that they lag? So it's a great question, and I'd love to get Max's kind of perspective on this. Like oftentimes the way that we recommend doing this is like the more transparency, the better. And this kind of goes to this notion of like systematization of the like permeation of these assets. We talk about this a little bit in like our data-driven coaching masterclass, but a really, really great way of making sure that that everyone is kind of like aware of what's going on, kind of like what Max was saying, is like using broadcasts. Kind of like the old school way of doing this was to have like, monitors up on the sales floor or whatever that like everyone just kind of like walks past and ignores. But it was less about like what was on the monitors. It was more kind of like, we care about metrics. Now, whether or not those were in being reviewed in meetings was a different question, because usually that wasn't the case. But I think the more kind of like, the more transparent you can make this, the more that everyone kind of knows that they're on the same page, which is particularly important to your high performers, right? Like your high performers don't want to be hanging out with a bunch of people who are like just mailing it in. And so by having kind of more transparency and more kind of visibility of those things, the people who like you set expectations better, like Max was saying, and people are like, cool, I'm supposed to be doing this thing and I see that I'm here and I'm going to kick it up a notch. Or you have somebody who's outperforming and they're like, yeah, I'm supposed to be here and I know what I'm at here because I work my ass off and it makes me really happy and that's like what I value. And then you have the folks down here where it's like, hey man, you got to get in line, or like manager, and like the other reps are like, manager, I'm looking at you, like you need to manage this guy, like guy or gal, like up or out. So I think more transparency usually better there. Max, how would you what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think the big thing that like we're helping a lot of our customers do is we'll make unique like views, like unique like data asset views in Atrium, dependent upon like the use case and like the role that's consuming them. So like if an organization has like their reps wanting full access to Atrium, like we'll have specific things that they'll be consuming on a recurrent basis, and then we'll have those will be different than what maybe their manager or their VP
Sure.
of sales is consuming.
Yep.
And so it won't be like the same for each of them, but like you'll kind of really get to curate and tailor what that stuff is. And so, yeah, and some of that could be leaderboards for rampers based on what cohort they're part of and the leading indicators we care about. So all of that stuff can kind of just get curated for them.
Yeah, it's like persona appropriate assets. I think that's a great book, because I think you were pointing out earlier, Max, like keep it simple, stupid, like meetings, op ownership, something like that. Same with things like, just pure kind of activity hustle things, like, all right, cool, like on a Monday morning we send out a broadcast. It's like, hey, cool, like here's the leaderboard of how many customer facing meetings everybody had last week and how many other ops they touched. Kevin, what are you doing? Were you like asleep last week? Like what's happening, buddy? Right? Ha ha ha. Okay, cool. Right? Like a little friendly ribbing, that sort of thing. Like, oh man, like, Susan, you really hit the cover off the ball. That's awesome. Congratulations. Woohoo. Everyone be like Susan. And like kind of keep that simple. And and then whereas like a manager might have things like, might be more efficiency centric things like win rates or opportunity conversion rates and kind of things like that to help them understand, oh, okay, I need to focus in on this thing with Susan, or this thing with Frank, or whatever. Whereas the reps are looking at something that's maybe a little bit more kind of like straightforward. That's a really fantastic point, Max. Thank you. Did we have another question here? Cool. So that was Carrie's, and then Craig had a question here, which was, what does Atrium cost? Well, it kind of depends on the size of your sales organization. It ends up being, we price on a per manager basis. Most organizations, it starts out anywhere in the kind of like $7,000 to $8,000 range, and then it kind of like scales up from there. But the important thing is that at least the thing that we're really excited about is that it takes like 5 minutes to just set up an Atrium account, because very quickly, like if you have reps that are in ramp right now, it's like these things are probably making the hair on the back of your neck stick up, where you're kind of like, hey, how are my reps doing in ramp right now? Right? I know that I have 4 reps that are ramping. I would really like to get visibility into those leading indicators. It takes like 5 minutes to turn on an Atrium account. We can show you exactly what that looks like. We've put together a non-trivial amount of engineering effort has gone into making it happen very, very, very quickly. Wonderful. Well, I think we're out of time right now. So without any kind of further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to our main man, Eduardo. Eduardo, anything else that I missed? Anything else that we need to cover?
Well, I think that was all. That was fantastic.
Sweet.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pete and Max. That was fantastic, great content. I'm sure the audience will love to have the recording and the key takeaways. And as I said before, you will receive a follow-up email with the links for the recording and the key takeaways. So you have this content handy when you most need it. And it will also be available in the Modern Sales Pros website. In the previous events page. And once you're there, you can also check the upcoming events. Pete has another masterclass tomorrow. I am going to put a link right there. It's actually a fireside chat with Flo Butterfield. Everything about sales revenue how do you say that? Enablement. Sorry.
Say that 5 times fast, huh?
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Pete and Max, for joining us today and for all this content. Thank you, audience, for being here. We love having you here, and we will see you in the next event. Thank you so much.